Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the More Than You See podcast, where I have meaningful conversations with creatives about their mental health journeys. Please note, I am not a licensed practitioner or therapist, but an actor and a filmmaker who is deeply interested in sharing my own struggles and exploring the mental health of others. My hope is that these conversations bring you some joy, some personal understanding, and some tools so that you can build your own mental health toolbox. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. I am so excited to have my first repeat guest on the podcast today. Lianna is someone that I interviewed early on in the podcast, and we really talked about gut health and nutrition and how that affects your mental health. She was an actor in New York, did very, very well for herself for a long time until she had some health issues that made her re-examine her choices and kind of pivot her life in a really big way. Since then, since we last talked, she's had some other huge, incredible transitions in her life. And I wanted to bring her back because I think that what she is learning and what she is working on with her clients will really be applicable to what we talk about on a daily basis when it comes to dealing with your own mental health, having that self awareness, and pushing through the dark times and being able to focus on your purpose in life. I am so excited to have her back. And if this conversation resonates with you, please share it, rate, review the podcast, all of those things. It really does help spread the word of mouth. Without further ado, here is Lianna. Hi, Lianna. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me back.
Of course. You are our first repeat customer guest.
Woo!
Yeah.
That is a big deal, actually.
I
I
mean,
feel
it
like I
is.
should have a sash or something.
You should. I'm so excited to jump into so many things with you. But first of all, I'm going to go back for a second because one thing that I'm really trying to do is focus on authenticity and people showing up and expressing how they're actually doing right now. So, um, as far as like, how are you doing? Is there anything you want to add as far as how you're feeling today or how you're showing up in the world or anything?
I am today has been and I try not to blame anything on this stuff, but I swear, full moon in Pisces, everything going into retrograde. I woke up and I had to have a good cry. I was like, I think it's funny because it doesn't matter. I turned 40 this year.
Mhm.
And I swear every time I still have my period, I have a day where I'm like, I don't think it's so hard in the world. And I was having like one of those cries, and then I was like, oh no, it's hormones. I'm fine.
I totally understand that. I have a period app that my partner also tracks, and sometimes he's
Oh,
like,
good.
"Oh, you're gonna be in a mood today," and I'm like, "You're right, I am. It's wonderful." So, I love that. Thank you for sharing with us.
Of
Um,
course.
so, one of the reasons that I wanted to ask you back, and for everyone who hasn't, heard your previous episode, I'm gonna link that in the show notes. And in that first episode, we really talked about nutrition and health and how, you started as an actor in New York and then through a series of life events decided to move away from acting and into the nutrition and health space and about like how, what we put into our bodies affects our mood, our hormones, like all of those things. And how when you like examine that piece of yourself, it will affect, have a positive effect on everything in your body. And I think that like that's an episode that has done so well for us because I think so many people are so interested in, how eating this apple is going to affect us versus eating a slice of chocolate cake. And like we kind of know on some level, but to break it down into like the effects on our, serotonin and like all of the chemicals in our body, like that was just so incredibly helpful for so many people. You've had so much additional change in your life. And so I one of the focuses for me this season is to really bring people on who have a specific voice about a specific topic. And with you, I think it's really about all of the transitions that you've had throughout the, few years that I've known you. You've like transformed in so many different ways. And I think that that's really amazing and like gives the listeners permission to continue evolving and changing themselves. So I'm really excited to, jump into that with you. And so I want to maybe do a little bit of a recap for anyone who's heard your
Sure.
previous episode, but like, if you remember, which I'm sure you do, like what was the impetus for you transitioning from acting and moving into this, more mental health focused space?
Before I even jump into that, I just want to say thank you because you just made me feel incredibly seen. I like almost want to start crying. Where it's like you think that I think there's a lot of fear in transition.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I'm working in that field a little bit more these days, and it's so scary to give yourself permission to evolve and to be seen in that, and I guess appreciated for that feels really special. So bringing it back, I'd always when I decided I wanted to be an actor, I remember like it was something I loved as a child. My aunt was. I remember I didn't feel like I had permission. My parents were like, wanting me to my mom wanted me to go to business school like she did. And I remember the summer before my senior year, I watched Ashley Judd's True Hollywood Story about how she decided to be an actress. And it was right after college, and I was like, "Wait, she showed up later in life too," because I felt like by then it was too late, right? To be an actor. I can do it too. And it was, from there I went for it. I was taking, classes all the time again. I moved to New York. I was like everything, eat, breathing, sleeping, acting, everything I was doing, all of my time, effort, money, blood, sweat, and tears went into it. And I made myself crazy. And looking back, I mean, it was so the high highs, low lows, got to do TV with like Jimmy Fallon. I got to do Sundance, and then of course, like those months without jobs or bombing auditions at like NBC and stuff like that, where you're like, how? And by 26, 27, I started to have some weird health problems. And it was very easy to keep caffeinating and living in New York and go, 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 go. But over time, it just started to pile up, and it was physical, it was mental. There was depression, anxiety that were getting worse and worse. I was having fatigue issues, hormone issues. My hair was falling out. A lot of gastrointestinal issues that got really serious, like led to some pretty intense inflammation, some bleeding in my intestines, really scary, confusing stuff that I was seeing a myriad of different doctors for, a New York specialist, and everyone was either telling me it was in my head or it wasn't a big deal or put this pill on it or cream on, it was like no one was looking at me as a whole person. And I started, by 28 years old, I was like almost bedridden and with no answers. So just to feel better and to be able to get out of bed because you can't audition if you're having panic attacks and you feel bloated all the time. Like imagine trying to do like a sexy scene. You just feel like you're weighing 1,000,000 pounds.
Right.
And I started to do a lot of research and ended up finding this book about rebuilding your microbiome, and really changed my diet as almost a last ditch effort because they were going to put me on steroids. They didn't know what was going on, and it just felt like there had to be a better way. So I started playing around a little bit. And I just remember it was 12 days into this eating protocol that was very simple, just no sugar, gluten, dairy, not a lot of processed foods, no alcohol, no caffeine. And within that 12-day period, I woke up and it was like a light switch went on. And the day before I had felt horrible. And the interesting thing is like your baseline of health over time kind of gets lower and you don't notice
Right.
with more stress, with more on your plate, you're just going. And one day I woke up and it was like someone had taken like a really shitty Instagram filter off of my life. All of a sudden, my energy was back, but I realized I had my anxiety and depression were just gone. My outlook on life is different. And a really interesting thing that now I've seen over and over the years now, pivoting into nutrition and wellness, is my self-concept had changed. I had this connection to myself and this confidence that I didn't even realize I had really lost, but it felt like someone took about 10 years. I felt like I was 16 again, like optimistic, creative, exciting. All of that had gone. And from then I was like, whoa, I've done something that to me, yes, what is it hard as like a, 20 something year old bartender who used to be a sorority girl to give up drinking? Sure, at the time, where like a very, my self concept was being around fun and partying and, but I made very simple changes realistically. And within, under 2 weeks, everything had changed in my body. So I was just thirsty for more information. And as you know, in, the performance space, you're getting a lot of highly sensitive people like I am. big feelers, big motors that all deal with mental health issues. So I just found that I was one of those annoying people who couldn't stop talking about what was going on.
Yeah.
And from there, I just wanted to learn everything. I was like reading voraciously, and I was considering becoming a nutritionist or a registered dietitian. But this is over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really cool programs around like nutritional therapy and stuff that I totally would have done at the time. None of that existed.
Right.
And the only thing I found was the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. So I went there and became a health coach. I didn't even know what a health coach was. But really, it was this really beautiful integrated practice where they taught you so much around nutrition and different ways of eating, but also understanding that health is not in a vacuum or a bubble, that it is so related to balance. So, nutrition isn't just what you put in your body, and your body isn't healthy just because of exercise, but you have to look at sleep and stress management and the people you surround yourself with and how you spend your time and the thoughts you're thinking and the way you talk to yourself. So it was this really beautiful, holistic education. And then I just started doing that on the side. And I just felt so passionately about how it had affected me, my instrument. And immediately, in those coming years, I was booking more roles, I was getting better agents, I was working a lot more. Me taking care of myself and really looking at my mind body connection, my thoughts, the fuel I put in my body, all of a sudden made me a better actor. So
Right.
I really wanted to spread the word to other actors.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's something that I talked a lot about in the first season of the podcast was about how our environment, what we put in our body, like the thoughts that we think, like all of those things have like such a big impact on our mental health. And it's not just, one thing that you need to try and, like maybe this is a bad example, but like if you're like, okay, I'm going to meditate every day. It's like, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to meditate. But if you are meditating and you are meditating in a space that brings you a lot of stress, like you're meditating
Yeah.
at work, like that's not going to help, like it
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
it'll help a tiny bit, but like you need to look at so many different aspects of how we're showing up in the world in order to like truly make big changes.
Yeah.
So, I think that's so incredible. And so how like and you mentioned this before, but like how did you give yourself permission to make this jump? Because you mean you're not an actor at present anymore.
No.
Um, but like, that's definitely something for people who might be listening, who might be thinking about either transitioning away from acting or from some other kind of job and,
Yeah.
and making
Yeah.
a big jump in your life. Like, how did you give yourself permission in order to make that move?
Well, there are two different really pivotal moments for me. And one was because it was funny with the nutrition training, I started doing coaching and they really taught you to get to the root cause. And, people having a complicated relationship with food or alcohol, or you could extend that on to like shopping or smoking or sex, always come to an imbalance in another area of their life. So here I am doing a couple of sessions and like, helping 55-year-old men into new careers. So I
Right.
was like, okay, I might want some other training. So I ended
Huh?
up working with this woman who had a really interesting business, and it was very much around personal leadership and development. But to work at her business, you had to train under her for a year. And I remember she was like, well, what is your definition of success?
Mm.
And I was like, okay, it's this one specific idea. Cause I think we're often told to like, if you want success, you have to like think about this one thing and hold on to it and run for it as fast as you can.
Right.
And it was this idea that I remember it was like, okay, I want to be in an ensemble cast like Friends. And I
Mhm.
wanted to be comedy, but like written by Judd Apatow. So with a lot of heart. I wanted to live on something like Netflix or HBO. And I remember I had this whole thing. And she listened and she was like, do you see that as an incredibly narrow focus? And if that's the only way you'll be happy is this one specific outcome. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, and I know all these casting directors and and she was like, okay, don't you like, can we get to the essence of like, what is it that you love about this idea and how would it make you feel? And really let's zoom out to like, what makes you so excited about this and acting in general, right? And
Yeah.
her whole thing was like, we all have this gift that we're connected to, this thing that we can't help doing all the time. And once you identify it, like it's the thing that you can't help doing at parties, at the gas station, at work, like you're always in your element. And we zoomed out. For me, it was, and what I loved about acting was storytelling,
Mhm.
vulnerable, deep connection. helping people feel good, like learning new things. And it was funny. And when we went down the rabbit hole with, what were the elements of it that seemed so wonderful? It was like, okay, what are other areas of your life that you do this and that you feel like connected to your gift, quote unquote? And I was like, whoa, I guess like my coaching practice
Right.
does that. And, wow. And I am that girl at parties or at Dwayne Reed where someone will turn around and start telling me something incredibly personal. And I'm like, I was just, buying tissues. I don't
Right.
know. And I was like, okay, so this is an area of my life that I do feel good and empowered and it's natural. And she's like, what if you allowed yourself, like, if that's what makes you happy and makes you feel in flow, to do that all the time? Like,
Mm.
we feel the best in our lives when we're connected to our gift. Like, what if your priority was just focusing on amplifying your gift in the world? And it was really hard for me because I didn't want to hear that. And I was like, no, 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 I'm an actor. Blah, 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 blah. But once she opened the blinders up a little bit, it allowed me to enjoy the elements that I really loved about acting when I was teaching, when I was coaching, when I was sometimes I'd speak at workshops, so I started to pay attention to where I felt the happiest and where I was most at ease. And then the other part of it just kind of was happenstance, the pandemic.
Yeah.
It was the first time in 14 years I had stopped auditioning. There was nothing happening. It was very quiet, and we were having a mental health and physical health crisis simultaneously, and somehow I'd, built this side business that I had for a number of years already, where that was my focus, was really helping people support both sides of that. So for the first time in my life, my coaching business was full, and and at that point, I was, like, giving a lot of stuff away for free to actor or, like, very little money just because we're all at home. I knew a lot of my friends or my previous clients, and I had worked with a lot of actors. I had taught at an acting conservatory. No one had work. So
Right.
I was just kind of purely doing it out of love and, taking money here and there and whatever. But I was full-time coaching. And after a couple of months, I realized I didn't miss acting and I was so much happier.
Mm.
And it was really interesting because everything inside me was like, no, my ego, I had this idea of what, I decided as a teenager, this is the life I was going to, and in my mid 30s, I was like, uh-oh, like I'm realizing that this other thing makes me happy and feel empowered and wonderful. And this other thing was starting to be a drag. And I remember before I'd moved to LA, right in the beginning, like the January before the pandemic, I moved to LA. And one of the last I booked like a very big Buick commercial,
Mhm.
and it was this beautiful house, and I was like the star, and it was a lot of money, and it was a big deal, and everyone's doing all the things for me, and it was cute outfits and all, just one of those jobs that like, even though it was a commercial, it was like fun and great. And like I'd met the producer through a comedy thing. So the set was really nice to be on. And it was just like all of the things you want in a, 1 day job where you're gonna get a chunk of money.
Right.
And I just remember, like, halfway through the day looking at my watch and being like, "Is it time to go home yet?"
Yeah.
And me being like, "Uh-oh, uh-oh. This is supposed to be, like, this is, like, what you
Best
get
day.
excited
Right.
about. This is the best part." And, yeah, not commercials where, like, doing movies and TV is more fun, but, like, this is one of the good jobs. If you're not happy here, you might not be happy doing this. And I just remember being like, "Shut up, shut up, shut up. Shh, no, brain, no, heart, wherever this is coming from, like, I will not listen." And the pandemic gave me enough space and just showed me what it was like to fully be in my gifts, to fully be of service,
Yep.
and to let go of a lot. And I started to realize too, because of course I got into nutrition and I had an eating disorder. I had a lot of like my own mental and physical health struggles as like an actor and a model in my early 20s. And, like, I didn't realize that, like, even there was a part of me that was worrying about aging that, like, I let go of, that was worried that kept me a little skinnier, not in an unhealthy way, but I was a little stricter just 'cause of and it allowed me to just relax into my body, and I think I was, like, 37 at the time, 36 or and, like myself more, and I was like, "Whoa." For me, this career, like, really pushed me and maybe it was kind of toxic, and I think I had outgrown a lot of what I needed. So it was funny, I talked to my agent, my manager, and I was like, "I just wanna take a break," like most actors were. Like, "I just wanna take a break." And then I remember, like, maybe 6 months into it, I started talking to, like, a therapist about it, and I was like, "I'm having a really hard time letting go of, like, my acting career, AKA my acting addiction."
Right.
And he really allowed me to see that because I really associated and I think this is true for everyone across the board, right? When, like, you pivot. And I'm also divorced. So in like a 2-year span, I pivoted careers in a major way and also let go of a 10-year relationship. So there was a lot of which was a beautiful, like, conscious uncoupling. He's like a friend of mine. He's lovely. It was the right thing for us. But these two things where I really could have taken that on as failure and felt embarrassed. And I was like, I really know that in my heart of hearts, like, we've outgrown this relationship and we'll let it go with love. But I've also maybe grown into something a bit different and a bit more than what I was offering with my acting career.
Yeah.
And I want to lean into that with like love and be excited about that, not feel shame and call myself a failure. So I ended up working with a therapist for a little while just to reframe how I was talking to myself.
Yeah. It's so interesting, like what you were saying before about like the feeling of things.
Yeah.
Uh, I was talking with my shaman the other day.
Ooh.
And, she was leading me through a meditation, like a manifestation meditation, and she was talking about how, like focusing on the feeling of something, but also
Hmm.
focusing on like her practices that when she manifests that she focuses on the stars, like thinking about like your place and that feeling in within the stars, and then within the planet, and then within the United States, and then within California, and then within Los Angeles, and then within yourself. And she was saying how like, obviously we are from stars and we
Hmm.
are, that is literally what we are made from, but also just that like when we have our when we align ourselves and our feelings of like where we are in our place and like what makes us happy within the greater universe, then we're really finding like how we fit in with everyone, where it's not just like, trying to force yourself into something that may not be aligned with like everything else in the world. And I think that like from a non woo woo perspective, if someone is listening to this and they're like, shaman, what? Woo woo, what? But like, I think that, if you think about it from a practical perspective, like some people are like meant to be doctors. Like that is like
Yeah.
taking care of people and, diagnosing and like all of that kind of stuff. Like that is their alignment. And I feel like people, really know that and like come into themselves. But there also, are these transitions throughout our lives, and I think that especially in careers where it isn't something like a doctor that you've studied for 12 years in order to, do it, but it is something like an acting career where, yes, you have studied, but it also like there's so often so little return on the investment that we have to focus on the feeling of something.
Mhm.
It cannot just be transactional as far as like I, am doing this service and I'm going to get money for it. We have to feel good in what we're doing, because if you
Yeah.
don't, that is sometimes the only like transactional, thing that's happening there.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's so key that, you realizing that and realizing like this does not leave me happy anymore. Like this feeling is not how I want to show up in the world. Um,
Yeah.
and that's so key. And, we were talking before about, before we hopped on the podcast, about how you're finding now that people are spending less money and are doing less self work as far as finding that alignment and finding, what makes them happy. And I think that unfortunately is, harkens back to pre-pandemic where people are in
Yeah.
a go, go, go mentality and are, unwilling to really like take a breath and look at our lives and decide if like what we're doing is actually making us happy or not.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, like from your perspective as a coach, and also, you've now moved multiple times and you're no longer
Yeah.
in the US, so you're no longer, you know, held by our guidelines of like success. And
Yeah.
curious just like how all of that is sitting with you.
It's been really interesting. Well, it was such a beautiful, like, the pandemic obviously was awful in a lot of ways, but I think it gave so many of us this moment to sit and reflect and change. And I think a lot of people didn't like what they felt and they saw and they were grasping at anything. And it was great on some level because I got access to a lot of people who were really excited to do the work. But as soon as kind of the world opened up again, you saw that. And it was interesting too. I could even see it with a lot of my clients because, we're connected on social media. We're like, some people really held on to it, and I watched them thrive and flourish and, go on to create these big, healthy lives or heal or find love. Or, I just did a podcast with one of my first clients from my first group a few years ago. And it was so funny 'cause she reached out to me being like, oh, my life, like telling me all these amazing stories. I was like, can we have a conversation about this? This is amazing. And then there is the other section of people who maybe weren't ready. And you see people kind of going back to, hustle culture or like actually, I'm very good friends with my former agent.
Mhm.
And she had actually, it was funny. She was my first agent. And then I kind of went to another company and then she got promoted. And later I like went back to her. But in the interim, I had started my company. So she'd become a health coaching client.
Mm.
And like, so we have this really funny and beautiful, very intertwined career professionally. And she's now looking to leave New York and maybe the business. But she was like, it's so crazy because she's one of the people that did really do the internal work and notice. She's like, none of this makes sense for me anymore. Like New York and like no one's taking care. Like we all went back to what was making us sick and crazy. And I can't continue to like live in this charade
Right.
where none of this is working. And it was interesting because I ended up during the pandemic moving abroad, and I was so burnt out on New York. I'd spent 14 years there. It was like, and it was killing me. And I ended up spending about a year and a half between like rural Maine, where I grew up, and Cornwall, which on the ocean, the very southern tip of England, which I had never like turquoise water, palm trees, like what? It was just so, I was so fortunate.
Yeah.
And then, in the relationship I was with at the time, we moved to London. And that was nice compared to like New York, but it was still a little bit too much of a big city. And when that relationship, we decided to part ways, I thought I would move back to Los Angeles. And I took a flight to the East Coast and I couldn't even be in the US anymore. It was like just going back to the East Coast and the idea of going to LA and like going back into American hustle culture was just so revolting to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know I spent the past 2 years like completely rebuilding my life in this other way. And it was funny because I moved to LA as a step back from New York. And then, of course, the pandemic, we all like took this break. And London definitely felt like I didn't realize it would feel like a step down from LA, but it did. It was like the pace was different. It was a lot easier, greener, just felt like a lot more of a civilized city than a lot of the big US cities.
Yeah.
And then I spent the summer in Paris, which was slower than London. So I was like taking these steps back. And then I ended up in Lisbon, Portugal, just on a whim. Literally, like two friends sort of suggesting it. I had a gap of time. I found a couple of Airbnbs. It was cheaper than anything else had been. And we'll talk about a feeling, right? I stepped out of my Airbnb for the first time and I was like, wait, something feels really good. And lived in Brooklyn for a while. I really loved it. That was like, I think 5 years of my life felt like the most connected and creative and exciting. And I had not found that feeling since. And weirdly alone in an Airbnb that wasn't that great, like at 9 o'clock on like a Thursday night, I was like having this really interesting sensation of home. And I was like, this is weird. And
Yeah.
for that month, I traveled in and out. And it was so funny because my acting manager had introduced me to one person because we had crossed paths in Paris before I'd gotten here. And we're quite close. She introduced me to one woman. And on the strength of that relationship, she introduced me to a few people. So in that month, I made all these really interesting, conscious, wellness-focused people. And every time I came in and out of Lisbon, I would get this weird sensation of home. And it was so wild. Talk about thinking about a feeling. I left being like, I don't know where I want to live, but like, I feel like I'm supposed to live in Portugal. Like, that makes no sense. And last year, and we'll talk about like woo stuff.
Yeah.
And this is so funny because I feel like I'm slowly like coming out as more woo woo and no longer in this space. Because the more I think you start with like the physical stuff you talk about, like that disconnection from your body that ends up being a lack of health and vitality. You start to slow down and take better care of yourself. You start to listen to yourself more. You start to manage stress I studied meditation for a number of years. I'm a big proponent of that for the physical and mental health aspects of it. You start to listen to your intuition more than your brain,
Yeah.
and you start to watch really interesting things start to happen. And I remember I got back from traveling all summer. I was sort of digital nomading around from June until October. And I got back and I sat with, I'm at my parents' house, my late 30s. It's like being like, okay, what do I do? I need to like find a place to live. I cannot do. My mom was like, we don't bring you back, stay here. And I was like, absolutely not.
Yep.
And I was like really sitting with like, whoa, I like London, I like Paris. And I talked to this one girl I met here and she had some good advice. And I remember being like, okay, I'm going to ask the universe for a sign, which I never do,
Hmm.
about where to go. But I don't know what that sign is. So I'm going to go back to writing emails and I completely forget to ask. And the next morning I wake up and I do my, my morning things, I meditate, whatever. And I finally open my email and I look and I've had a forwarded email from my dad that was from my neighbor randomly.
Hmm.
That was the Washington Post article announcing the new digital nomad visa for Portugal that was being released in 3 weeks. And I was like, whoa, I guess this is the sign.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
pretty loud.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow. Okay, I guess this is it. And then the process kind of unfolded in this way that was a little bit miraculous, it felt like. And it was scary because I was like, this makes no logical sense.
Right.
My rational brain was like, what the hell are you doing?
Mhm.
But how it felt, I kept doing the check in with the body and really feeling into how it felt. And it kept feeling right. And it kept feeling right. So it's like, I guess I just go with it. And I think that going back to what you and I were talking about a little bit and like the decision to pivot.
Mhm.
And before I even got there, I remember I was like around 35. I had been in my relationship for 10 years. We were married. It was everything that I had wanted. The
Mhm.
husband was like everything on paper, the life, the apartment. I was working consistently as an actor enough. We
Mhm.
had enough money where it didn't matter. I had a very nice, comfortable life. And I was so unhappy.
Mhm.
And it was so hard to reconcile because my brain was like, look, all the things. You can
Right.
get Botox and Pilates and buy handbags all day if you want. And my soul or my heart or whatever you want to call it was just, it felt like I was suffocating from the inside.
Yeah.
And it was so hard to reconcile the fact that like everything that I had worked for, I had achieved to some level.
Mhm.
And it didn't felt like what I thought it would. It didn't feel like what I thought it would feel like. And it was devastating, and it was in that moment that I kind of gave up and started not in the way that like, "Oh, whatever," but it was like, maybe I don't know what's best for me.
Yep.
So instead of using my brain and culture and what my parents have told me and looking at what my friends are doing to make decisions, what if I just allowed myself to follow what like felt really much like where I had desire and, what lit me up creatively, what felt like love and peace.
Yeah.
So deciding that was really what allowed me to unravel, it took me 2 more years to unravel the acting career, but also the relationship and all those things. But really leaning into the feeling around it was
Yeah.
how I ended up in Portugal.
Yeah. Something that I think people really struggle with is this idea of like sunk cost, the things that, like
Yeah.
you've already put so much money into acting. You've already, you done, booked so many things. You've got these
Yeah.
relationships. Like, you probably could have continued and who
Oh,
knows,
yeah.
maybe have one day actually been on a Friends like show written by Judd Apatow. Like that's
Right.
entirely possible with
Oh,
you.
yeah, yeah. I had been he had seen my auditions for other things.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, my tapes had been in front of him. Like, I
Right.
knew casting directors and all of the networks at that point. Like, I'd come close to a lot of big things.
Right.
So, like, absolutely. So
Right.
and that was the interesting thing too, because at the end of, right, like, the year or 2 before the pandemic, I would have these moments of like, "Oh, what's happening?" But then I book something, and then you're in it again. You're like, you get a hit of the drug.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that, like, for anyone who's listening, who's first of all like, dang it, like, screw you for, having all this success and stuff. But I think that like again, going back to like the sunk cost of things and the fact that like no matter what you have put into the past, no matter what, you have devoted to this career that you are currently on, by transitioning, by pivoting to something that will make you happy, you will still come out better in the end. And
Yes.
and I wonder,
Thousand times. Yeah.
like how with your clients who you help them in these, times of crisis,
Yeah.
like how do you help them think through that?
Well, it was so interesting. It was so wild because at one point, and you hear people say this and you're like, shut up. Um, but at one point, I remember I'm like, I developed these group programs. You know, I have, at any point, like 20 to 30 clients, or I'm on these calls with like 15 people. And I am storytelling, I'm performing, I'm like using all of the tools that I learned, whether it was through growing and healing or whether it's through like being on set. I remember looking back at a point like a year or two ago and being like, whoa, I needed every single one of those lessons. Every single one of the, like, though it doesn't directly correlate, like so much of how I developed as an actor allowed me to be really good at what I do now in so many different ways. And what I tell people is as soon as I talk about this a lot with my clients is like, it's good to have an idea, right? It's good to know what you want and have goals, but open palm, right? Like for me in the beginning, I was holding on to this very specific idea and I was not allowing in more joy, more money, more fun, more healing. And as soon as I opened my palm to the idea of like, I want to make people feel good. I want to learn. I want to tell stories. I want to make people laugh. I want to feel connected, and allowed myself to have more of those experiences. A lot of stuff came in and it was so interesting. After I developed my program, my first year of doing it, I'd made more money I couldn't believe how much money I'd made in such a short amount of time. And it sort of expanded my like I didn't even think I was capable of that. Like it was not even the point, right? Like I knew I needed to support myself, and I was so surprised. And I came out of it and it was so interesting because I was like, everything that I was looking for in terms of creative expression, connection, all of those things and more that I was dying to get from my acting career, I got in spades
Mm.
from working for myself and being an entrepreneur and starting my own business and putting together everything that I had learned to heal physically, mentally, emotionally, everything I learned in acting school and nutrition school, everything I'd seen my clients heal from for years into this one thing and be able to put it out into the world as a creative expression. It was the first time I felt fully expressed as an artist.
Mm.
And I was like, how wild that this thing I was chasing as hard as I could to points where it was literally making me sick.
Right.
That when I allowed it to be a little different, but use all of my skills, it was better than I could imagine. And I always tell this to clients. Your brain can only come up with dreams, with scenarios, with ideas that you've already experienced.
Mhm.
Maybe you'll get snippets and pieces from other people's lives or other people's experiences, but often you're only creating things that you've experienced or you've seen your peers experience.
Right.
So if we are more open to possibility,
Mhm.
often what shows up is something more beautiful than you could imagine. Like it's just so you're like, in a million, if you told me 5 years ago, I'd be like working for myself, running my own business, doing podcasts, like living in Portugal on my own in my own apartment. It was like, dating a like 32-year-old, by the way, with like a sailboat, like having the most fun.
Yeah.
I would have been like, what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah.
So if you allow it, and I'm really into, do you know Martha Beck?
No.
I really love her work.
Okay.
She's got a really interesting story. She's the life coach. She kind of happened into it. She like gone to Harvard. She was a professor there. She kind of left academia. And she kind of does like spiritual life coaching stuff, but she's so funny and quirky and weird. And it's so lovely. She always talks about like I found her through, I guess, one of my mentors, but I talked a lot about like feeling into things and the further I got away from, like, what I had learned and looking at the microbiome and the brain and starting to build things off of what I've seen clients have success from, not from what I'd learned in books, I started to get afraid, right? And she started talking, and here's this woman who went to Harvard, who taught at Harvard, all these degrees. She's talking about the same thing I'm talking about. I'm like, okay, I think I'm okay. Like maybe I'm in this weird area too, but at least someone else who like at least like went to Harvard, has written books, is saying this. But she talks a lot about like feeling into things. And there was this thing that I took from her work a year or so ago that I really, really love, that I share with my clients, where it's like once you get off of like outside of culture, right? Where it's like you get the job and the picket fence and the kids and you're doing what your parents did or what your friends from college are doing. And you're sort of out there on your own. So all these people that want to do this transition, and maybe they were doctor or did go to medical school, even they don't want to do that anymore, right? That's even scarier, where it's like starting to stop navigating with your brain and with rational thinking and with like looking at, what everyone else has done and start navigating with your body. And she always says, like, ask yourself these 3 questions. And I think it's like the most powerful thing to do. And it for me is there desires, number 1, or is there a sweetness in your heart is what she calls it. So is there's this tug, and usually it's obvious, like when there is desire, like when I would notice I'd be on set in between takes, reading books on the microbiome, telling anyone who would listen about gut health.
Mhm.
Like, well, if you get tired after we eat the pizza, you might have a gluten thing and like it
Right.
makes brain fog and da 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 da. Da. But like I was holding court in the green room talking about like poop and like having more fun. They would come to set and I'd be like, oh, but I was telling everyone about gut bugs.
Right.
And so there's desire there. Is there peace in your gut? So is making this decision, just following this, creative idea, jumping off the cliff, whatever it is, getting the job, leaving the relationship, falling in love, whatever it is. Does it bring you this feeling of peace in your gut? So is it relaxing or constricting to think about?
Mm.
And then does this choice, whatever it is, make you feel more free or less free? Do you feel expanded by it or do you feel contracted? Does your world get bigger or smaller? And I swear, if you just start making decisions based on that, your life unfolds in a way that is like more beautiful than you can imagine.
Mm. That's really interesting. So focusing on the desire and then focusing on how it feels in your gut.
Yeah, and just in your body in general. And so I get people, and it was funny because as we talk about transition, I'm, in this interesting place where I've been working with my clients for extended periods of time after the disconnection and I don't feel good in my body. I have weight issues, I have whatever issues around, and getting them connected to themselves, right? Or to at least the desire, the intuition, and then teaching them how to use it, which is really fascinating.
Right.
But just starting to navigate things based on your inner knowing, your inner compass, and trusting that you're the only one that knows what's best for you. So, like, really shutting out the other noise.
Yeah. That's amazing. So if anyone is listening and wants to work with you, I would love to hear like what your current framework is as far as like working with people. Um, do you take, one-offs? Is it a group thing? Like how do you currently work with people?
So I do both group and one-on-one. The group program that I developed during the pandemic, I'm doing for the last time. I'm like, it's bittersweet. I'm really excited about it, but I'm building some other things and I'm turning this into like an online course.
Mhm.
Because I find that the intro stuff about getting people just sort of more optimized,
Yeah.
and the 3-month program is really interesting. We spend a month, sort of focusing on the body, a month focusing on the mind, and then a month sort of solidifying those tools. So I really find that, and it can be so simple, right? Really understanding nutrition, really very basic things about nutrition, but exploring what works for your specific body because everyone's different. And I really stress the concept of bioindividuality. So understanding that like what I put in my body may be very different than yours. I really teach people about hormone balancing because that affects your brain, your mood, your energy, eating for and blood sugar. If you understand like eating for hormone balance, blood sugar, and basic nutrition, you heal your gut, you can support your metabolism, you support your immune system, and above all, you support your mental health.
Yeah.
So, with a month or so working together, we've optimized your brain. And what we become very present to is what's actually going on underneath. Because anytime you're sick, you're gaining weight, you're chronically ill, it's a disconnection from your true self. You're not listening. Your body's asking you to quiet down, like slow down, get in bed, listen, listen, listen. There's something not working in your life. So that second month, we get really present to what that is. And that tends to be either a really challenging relationship with the self. So maybe bad beliefs around, who you are, negative self-talk. So we look a lot about that. So I bring neuroscience into it, some psychology. It can be trauma sometimes, and
Mhm.
we'll farm people off to the appropriate type of therapist for that and support them in that. Um, the wrong career. So many people end up gaining weight and being stressed because they hate what they spend most of their time doing. And if we have this one precious life and you're spending 40, 50, 60, 80 hours a week doing something that drains you, that's going to make you really sick. Or in the wrong relationship or blocking love.
Right.
So we really look at and just give tools around, how do you support yourself in, how you speak to yourself, your thoughts and feelings, how do you avoid anxiety, how do you eat in a way that really optimizes your mental health and connects you to yourself, and then let me give you tools to really listen and trust yourself. So we build a framework. By the end of the 3 months, you're understanding not only how to take care of your physical body, which I love, love, love working with artists and actors, because they listen to, because they understand, right? They
Yeah.
see the performance aspect of it, where everyone's a performer in their life. Like this
Right.
works for everyone. Or
Yep.
it's like you really understand sleep, what kind of movement, what kind of stress management, what kind of food. And then the other side, what kind of practices, where you get in your own way with thoughts and feelings, and what you're afraid of. And so much of what the work is, and this is why I'm excited to kind of take this to the next level and make this sort of the intro course, is you can do a lot of that stuff on your own. And then what I love doing the most is really helping deepen that connection and push you off the cliff, right? Where it's like, let's give you tools to start that business, to leave that relationship, to get clear about what you truly want. Because I've seen this and now I believe it, like, we all have that, like, one special thing
Mhm.
that not only you have desire to do that you love, but that also benefits everyone else.
Yeah.
So when you're happy and you're aligned and you're doing what you love, the world is better. It's
Yes.
easier to make money. It's easier to, and if we tie this back into health, when you like how you spend your time, you can get away with more pizza and tequila, right?
Yep.
Like, it's just very interesting that food and how you treat your body is everything and nothing at the same time. In the beginning, it can be everything when you're disconnected. But if you're really happy and you're not overly stressed and you like how you spend your time, you can get away with a lot more. So it's like a
Yeah.
really deep understanding of your instrument. But then what I love the most is getting people really listening and trusting themselves and supporting them in creating like businesses and having kids and lives. And it's just, honestly, I'm like, I have these moments, I'm like, I get to watch people fall in love with who they, always were, and
Mm,
give them the tools to, like, fly.
yeah. That's incredible. And when does your course close for that?
I'm starting mid-September, the
Okay.
17th probably, but it may get pushed a week back just because of
Yeah.
stuff. So it's 3 months. It'd be on Sunday mornings if you're on the West Coast, US time, and then sort of in the late afternoon Europe time. And they're all recorded. You get a number of, it's lecture based. We do a lot of discussions. You get one-on-one. And what I realized, it was so funny. So I just was in Ireland at a wedding I went to the Atlantic Theater's Acting Conservatory in my 20s. And as an actor, I'm sure you've had these experiences where we like studied for 2.5 years. By the end, it's like you feel like you went to war with these people.
Yep.
And I probably would never have been friends with like most of them,
Right.
but they are like in me, like they feel like my family. And I hadn't seen them, especially like in this new incarnation of my life where I lived in Europe. And there was a bunch of them here, and she was Irish. That's why she got married there. And I just couldn't stop crying all week. Because I realized that, like, what they represented for me was people you heal so much, I think, as an artist, right? And in that 2.5 years, like, I really had to face a lot of my own stuff to, like, be brave enough to get on stage and use my voice and do all the things. And they loved me through that.
Right.
And what I realized that I love the most, and I'll continue to do groups as I sort of reformulate what that looks like, but you get a group of women, and they're women only at this point, but I take men one-on-one clients for sure. Um, a group of a bunch of different women who have a shared goal of healing and connection, but maybe come from very different backgrounds, witnessing and holding space for each other. I've never seen it's so exciting to watch, because not only are you learning from me, you start to connect to each other and learn from one another in these really exciting ways, and it just ends up being this really beautiful, like, community. And now it's funny, like, I have these women who, like, are flying across the US to meet each other. I've had
Mm,
a couple of my clients, like, come through Portugal that I'd never met in person, and it feels like I'm doing this, tiny little thing in the world to help spread love and connection and healing.
yeah, that's amazing. Well, I mean, going back to what I said at the beginning, like one of the reasons I wanted you back, and one of the reasons that I was like fully supportive of you sharing, your program and all of this kind of stuff, because obviously I'm selective about that, but is because you really are looking at that mind body connection, and like
Yeah.
how, it's not just woo woo. It's not just like, think manifest things in this specific way. It's like, no, we need to look at like how your body is reacting to things, what your environment is, like what you're doing on your day to day, what you're eating, like
Mm.
all of those things. Because if you don't address those things, you aren't able to heal yourself and like
No.
not able to stabilize your mental health and, all of those things. And I think that, having a good mental health space and like the place that I'm at right now, which I'm like so grateful is that I'm just like in a very like happy neutral most days. Like I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
very happily like skating along and I enjoy what I'm doing and I enjoy, my family and I'm just like I'm very happy and I know that's because I've reached a balance.
Yeah.
And when I have opportunities to act, then of course it's like very exciting and like you have that euphoria, but I also understand that like on the other end of it, I don't crash anymore because I don't,
Yeah.
there isn't that like heightened high and super low because when I come back to, the day after acting or whatever, I'm still just in that neutral, just like general happiness space. And I think that like we all deserve to have that where we can have euphoric days, but other days we're just like just happy with where we're at in life. I think that's so important.
Yeah, and it really is the simple foundational things, right? Where I always tell people, like, we all have the same mean critic in our heads, and when they talk about it, they're all saying something sort of similar, right? You're too much of this, not enough of that. And so much of the work I do, especially when women come to it, like body image issues or weight stuff, it's like, well, let's just now separate ourselves from that
Yeah.
voice and realize that instead of it telling us the truth, all it's doing is like waving a little red flag that we're out of balance.
Yep.
And when we're tired or hungover or stressed out, it's so hard not to listen to that mean girl in there.
Mm.
And when I tell people, like, when you start to notice it, don't believe it, but start to go through, and I have this list of non negotiables, and this won't be surprising to you because I'm sure you do all of them already, but it's going back to the basics where literally, have I slept enough? And this is where it's good to know yourself. Like, I know I need, if I'm like really taking care of myself, 7.5 hours. But if I'm stressed or I'm working harder, I need closer to 8.5, right? Like knowing your window, but like having had enough sleep.
Mhm.
Am I moving my body in ways that bring me joy on a regular basis, right? When we're too sedentary, that can be hard. Am I eating foods that work for my body? So again, this isn't being on a diet. It's just like, I know when I eat more vegetables, I feel better versus when I'm having too much sugar, I feel more anxious and dairy gives me stomach aches. Like everyone, that's different for everyone, right? So eating, moving, sleeping. Am I managing stress? For me, that's meditation. So, if I'm consistent with that, man, that makes my day different. Am I connecting to people on a regular basis that make me feel seen, heard, and loved? And am I finding moments for joy just for me? Like looking at a beautiful flower, dancing around naked in my room after the shower. Like, am I finding these little, and I promise you won't get 3 questions down that list, right? And you're like, oh, I've been drinking too much, or oh, I'm not sleeping, or I haven't moved, I haven't been to yoga in a while. And once you go back, if you have that list and you know the answers for you all of the time, everything else kind of gets easier.
Yeah.
And it's simple, but also can be very hard with busy schedules. But
Yeah.
it's those basic things that are the framework to create that really beautiful mental health or to help you cultivate that loving relationship or that job you really want.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have two final questions for you.
Sure.
The first one is, More Than You See is really all about masks and the fact that we often hide pieces of ourselves from society or from people. And I think that that is very, it's necessary in a lot of ways, but sometimes we use them as a crutch.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, you seem to be like truly living your best life and like in the most open and vulnerable, incredible way possible. But is there still a mask that you were putting on that you were trying to work through yourself, like a mask right now that you wear that is not serving you?
Yeah, I am very afraid to pivot away from leading with more nutrition stuff because that gives me my credentials.
Mhm.
People always want to lose weight, da da da. And I'm watching my who comes through my door evolve. I'm watching my coaching evolve. I am so afraid to come off as like woo woo and light and weird. And I know that the work I do is like really profoundly helpful. And I know that I get people deeply connected to themselves, whatever that looks like. But I'm so afraid to come out of like my traditional role and sort of pivot further into what I'm already doing and advertise myself that way,
Yeah.
because I think that people are going to think it's really weird. And I'm afraid to, like, I think there's that part of me that's like, everyone's going to laugh at you. And I'm doing it anyway because I just am, that's what's happening and that's who's coming through my door. And, but it's like, it's kind of what we're talking about. I've had this thing that's worked really, really well.
Yeah.
Why break it? Why change it? Right. But I feel really I feel like I could have a bigger impact if I'm synthesizing the information that I've learned in these past nearly 10 years of being in this space and being really clear with what excites me and interests me more, which, is a bit more neuroscience and meditation focused and really empowering people to do their own thing. I'm afraid I don't quite know how to talk about it. I'm afraid that, yeah, people will take me less seriously, or yeah, the idea of becoming too woo woo
Mhm.
is really scary because I came from a very academic family and my dad was a doctor, you know what I mean? So I'm definitely pushing up against that. And then I think there is the part of me, and turning 40 was a little bit, I was afraid. It happened in April. And I'm not married, I don't have kids,
Mhm.
I don't own a house. And it was like this moment of facing like all of the things that like you're supposed to have done. You don't have like, who cares that you like have this great younger boyfriend, you live in Portugal and you like are doing your best, like living your best life and you love your career, but like you don't have these other things. And like, look at all your other friends who did the thing that must think you're so embarrassing or a loser. Where it was like, I turned 40 and kind of a lot of that went away. But there are parts of me where it's like, and I think part of this is still residue of like leaving acting where you really feel that after 25, like you're about to like shrivel up and die because
Right.
everyone thinks you're 100 and gross and, like all of the messaging around like aging as a woman.
Right.
But there is a part of me that's really trying to celebrate the fact that, I'm single, I'm 40 and doing something a little bit different and living abroad and really having a wonder. Like the only time I have a bad time is when I decide to think too much about it or make it mean something.
Right.
But it's like that mask of, or even hiding that, right? Where it's like, no, no, this is what 40 looks like and this is what
Right.
we're doing. I'm
This is
having
what
a
my
great time.
40 looks like.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Um, and then final question is, do you have any tools that you use on a daily basis? And you kind of already mentioned some with meditation and those
Yeah.
sorts of things, but do you have any tools that you use on a daily basis to help you manage your mental health?
I mean, meditation definitely is like my number one, but I'm not always amazing. Yoga, again, is another good one. But I'm really movement and like the combination of movement with music, like walking. You know what I mean? Like if I need to change my state, putting on something that's going to make me, and then looking above the first floor. Like
Mm.
how, and it was funny because I saw someone write an article about this, which I think is really, well, I was like, this is what it's called. But essentially, awe walks, where like, if you don't have time for any of the other things, but you're transitioning and you have 5 minutes and you're walking somewhere to your car or something, it's like, whether or not I think music always helps, but it's like putting something on that makes me feel excited and then looking for beauty in the world because you find what you look for, right? So these little moments to train myself to look for delight or beauty, like see a cute cat or like, I mean, being in another country, it's easy because it's like beautiful tile or an interesting sunset or like, but can I have moments in the day where I find just a bit of awe and appreciation for the way the sun is streaming through the leaves.
Right.
And I notice that that will shift me from stress or lack or fear and into a more like grateful and appreciative state. And they always talk about how like gratitude is the easiest way out of, mental, any sort of like rumination. Once you really feel it, gratitude and awe kind of is there too. So it's this simple practice when I don't have time to meditate or do yoga, where it's like, where can I take a deep breath, look up or around and see something and really appreciate it?
Yeah.
And you do that every day more and more, you start to appreciate a lot of little things. And like we become what we practice. So then all of a sudden you're like, I just like my life. What? Like so pretty. My, my plant is growing. I'm so proud of it. Like little things like that.
Yeah.
Um, And that is, I learned that too. I was, traveling a lot last year, and there were highs and lows. It was the first time I'd spent that much time alone, especially abroad. And there's some fear around that because I'd sort of been in relationships and a bit codependent in a lot of my adult life or my whole life. What am I talking about? And I look back and it was the moments of like the really good bite of shrimp or the
Yeah.
first crisp taste of champagne or wandering around an afternoon in Paris, just listening to music, looking around. Those are the memories that like really stick into my heart and make me feel happy about being alive.
Yeah.
I'm like reminding myself that like really the deep beauty in life does come in the simplicity of those everyday moments of like connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about looking above the first floor, whether
Yeah.
that's, metaphorical or not, but it is such a reminder of like, we often look at our feet or look at our phones or whatever when we're walking. And I think that it's so, that was one of the best parts about having a dog, which I like look forward to having to adopting, rescuing a dog again soon. But like, being able to be outside, just me and the dog, and it forced me to look at the world,
Yeah.
in a, like, conscious way, which is so important for us to, like, have that greater consciousness with,
Yeah.
doing. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
You're
I
welcome.
really, truly appreciate it, and, I'm just so excited for what you're doing and, what you're gonna develop next, and I look forward to sharing it with everyone.
Thank you so much. And truly, I mean, when we first connected, I was like, yes, this is exactly what the world needs, especially the entertainment industry. So I think you're doing really beautiful work. And I'm happy to be back anytime. You are so much fun to have conversations with. So keep up what you're doing. It is making a huge positive impact.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to this latest episode of the More Than You See podcast. I hope that our conversation with Lianna helped bring you some greater understanding about your purpose in life, how you show up in the world, sunk cost, all of those things. I know that I certainly learned some new things about myself in this conversation, and I hope you did as well. Please remember to share this with someone who this conversation might resonate with. And please remember to be kind to yourself this week. Whatever is going on, we are here for you, the More Than You See community. Please remember that you and everyone around you is more than you see. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you again next week.